We were organizing ourselves in the group to meet up for a barbecue and reunite everyone after such a long time. We were planning it for July. But he wrote and asked us to do it in December so he could be present and cook the barbecue himself. That hurts because it's something deeper, you know? His last words to us, his group, were, "I will always be there. I will always be there to make the barbecue and play a match."
On October 27, 2018, a man walking through the eucalyptus forests of São José dos Pinhais in the Brazilian state of Paraná came across something strange on his journey. Driven by curiosity, he approached to see what it was, but he could never have imagined that what had caught his attention was a lifeless body with a completely disfigured face. The man immediately notified the police authorities, who arrived at the scene a few minutes after receiving the call. The forensic team inspected the area, and when they stopped at the body to try to identify it, they were overcome with shock. The victim, who lay in these lands isolated from urbanization, was none other than Daniel Correa Freitas, a well-known football player from that country. The 24-year-old, who belonged to the Sao Paulo Sports Club, showed visible signs of his murder, and what was even worse, his private parts had been mutilated. The news of this macabre discovery echoed in the media and quickly spread to every corner of the country, but it also transcended internationally. And it's that no one could believe the cruelty with which someone had ended the life of the footballer. Meanwhile, the authorities began an exhaustive investigation to identify the aggressor, or rather, the aggressors, as it was believed that a single person was incapable of committing such a barbarity. The gruesome details that came to light led to one of the most scandalous crimes in the country, but what generated even more controversy was the reason why Daniel Correa's life was attacked in such a savage way. Daniel Correa was born on January 24, 1994 in Juiz de Fora, state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. From a young age, he dreamed of becoming a football player, just like many boys his age. Fortunately, he had the talent to do it, but as innate ability was not enough to become a professional. His parents sent him to the Cruzeiro Academy, one of the most prestigious clubs in Brazil, so he could train and acquire the technique required by the sport. And although he never got to play for Cruzeiro's professional team, Daniel took advantage of the opportunity that had been presented to him to demonstrate his great skills with the ball, especially as a midfielder. So it was that in the year 2011, being just a teenager, his career took a major leap because that year he was called up to represent Brazil in the under-17 team with the green and yellow shirt. He also participated in international tournaments and demonstrated the quality of his game, which put him on the radar of clubs and coaches from the highest leagues. 2 years later, while he was in his last year of training at Cruzeiro, he was called up by the team based in Rio de Janeiro, which is Botafogo. This was his professional debut in the Brazilian Serie A football, and thanks to this rise in his career, he managed to establish himself as a promising player, and his lifelong dream was already beginning to come true. His technical skill and his ability to generate offensive play soon caught the attention of the São Paulo Sports Club, which in 2015 incorporated him into their team in the hope that he would become one of their great figures. But although until then all his achievements came without too much difficulty, his luck changed from one moment to another, and that is because Daniel had to face one of the worst experiences of his life while he was in the midst of his career peak. Shortly after signing a contract with Sao Paulo, he suffered a serious knee injury during a training session. The only possibility the experts gave him was to undergo surgery and prepare for a long recovery period. As you can imagine, that injury was a devastating blow to his career, as he spent at least a year away from the field. After extensive rehabilitation, the boy resumed activity on the playground. However, since nothing was ever the same again, he was inactive for a long time. The rising footballer had serious difficulties reaching the performance level he had shown before that injury, so he also failed to take over the place that Sao Paulo had reserved for him all that time. Until finally, in 2017, his club transferred him as part of a loan to the Coritiba team. But unfortunately, his experience there was no different. Since then, he started moving from team to team going through Ponte Preta until he arrived at Sao Bento, where he tried to seek continuity and playing time, but his performances were well received at times. However, the injury and lack of stability had already affected his career, and regarding his personal life, not much information was ever disclosed, but his closest environment describes him as a calm, loving, and attentive man to his loved ones. At that time, when he suffered the injury, Daniel had a daughter with his girlfriend at the time, and although the relationship between the adults did not prosper, the footballer made sure to give all his attention to the little girl and that she never lacked anything. The birth of his daughter had given him the strength to continue on his journey through the sport, but his recovery was no longer the same as it was at the beginning. The clubs were giving him few opportunities to play. Daniel then began to channel the decline of his football career with another of the activities he also used to enjoy, which were parties and social events, places where he could forget for a moment about his scarce presence on the playing field, as is usually the case with footballers. However, it was then when his life ended abruptly.
The Brazilian footballer Daniel Correa was almost whistled at, and when they found his body, it was without gender. The crime was discovered on Saturday night with large signs on an unused plot of land. Famous for finding the bodies of murdered people. The footballer was 24 years old, belonged to Sao Paulo, played on loan in the second division, and has shocked the football world throughout Brazil.
On October 27, 2018, the whole world knew about his tragic end. But what no one was able to answer was who could have so much hatred as to end his life in such a savage way. The police authorities who arrived at the scene also found no evidence there that could help them answer this question. But from the first minute, they made all resources available to uncover the truth. Daniel's body was sent to the morgue to undergo forensic examinations that confirmed the theory they had developed from the very beginning. In addition to mutation, the footballer had been a victim of suffering. He had wounds all over, and the cause of his end was a wound in the neck made with a white weapon. The wound was so deep that it was recorded as a partial detachment in the report. This has another name, but I can't tell you. It was evident that her attacker had acted with an excessive level of cruelty. Therefore, the investigators began a round of interrogations with the aim of deciphering if she had enemies. The first to be interrogated were the members of her closest circle. Relatives, friends, and colleagues from the clubs where she had played answered each of the questions the investigators asked them, but it took just one testimony to find a key clue. A friend of Daniel told them that the night before his end, he and the footballer had a text conversation through the WhatsApp application. In those messages, Daniel told him that he had traveled from Sao Paulo, where he lived, to Curitiba, the capital of the state of Paraná, because he was invited to a party. It was an 18th birthday party being celebrated by his friend Alana Brites. Thanks to this testimony, the investigators obtained the screenshots where, in addition, Daniel was telling his friend about the attraction he felt for the birthday girl's mother.
I can sleep here. There are several women sleeping in the house. I'm going to eat the birthday girl's mother, and the father is here.
These were some of the messages that Daniel wrote. So if they cut off his noble parts seeing this message, you can already realize where we are going. His friend, obviously worried, advised him not to do anything crazy because they could hit him and everything would end badly. But defying danger to the end, the footballer responded a few minutes later with 2 photos where he could be seen lying in a bed next to a blonde woman who was sleeping by his side. The photographs were fundamental elements for the next steps in the investigation. The authorities knew that if they could identify the woman appearing in these images, they would find more evidence to solve the case. So finally, the person accompanying the footballer in the photographs was identified as Cristiana Brites, the mother of the birthday girl and the woman he had noticed that night. Cristiana was married to Edison Brites, Up until then, they had been together for 20 years and had 2 daughters, a little one of 11 years whose name did not transcend because she was obviously underage, or was at that time, and Alana, the girl who was turning 18. This wealthy family, thanks to Edison's work as a businessman, had achieved a comfortable lifestyle. In addition, they were known for organizing ostentatious and luxurious parties that were attended by prominent personalities from the artistic and football environment. So with this information, the authorities were able to reconstruct the last movements that Daniel had made before his life was taken away. The Brites family had organized a party for Alana's 18th birthday at a nightclub. The celebration went on as normal until 6 in the morning. At that time, security cameras captured a group of approximately 15 guests, among whom was Daniel, getting into a vehicle and leaving the place. But the party was not over yet. On the contrary, they moved to the Brites family's home to continue the celebration in a, let's say, more intimate setting. And at that point concludes the information that the authorities had managed to gather the day after the discovery. However, to proceed with the investigation, they now went to this family's residence, and after several questions, they became considered as the main suspects of this barbaric crime.
We were in the party area. Then I went to my room to sleep with my friend. A second later, screams began. When we opened the door, he was on top of my mother. Everyone wanted to take action against him as my mother screamed, and he remained silent.
While the investigators were conducting separate interviews, they noticed that the versions of each family member contradicted each other. It was clear that they were trying to hide something, but they all agreed on one thing. Christiana, Edison, and Alana stated that they did not know Daniel and that he had certainly not been invited to the birthday party. However, these versions were contradicted by evidence presented by the footballer's mother to the authorities. Among them, she showed conversations that she herself had had with Alana and was able to prove that they had been friends for some time. There was even a photograph where both were seen celebrating the girl's 17th birthday. That's why, on October 31st, Christiana was ordered to be held in preventive detention, as she was the last person to have seen Daniel alive, according to the photographs that the footballer had taken with his phone. The woman was sentenced to spend 30 days in prison while the investigations continued. Then, the next day, Edison and Alana met the same fate and were arrested. Finally, on November 3rd, a Brazilian television network broadcast a video where the businessman and family man confessed his version of the events publicly. In it, Edison not only admitted to being responsible for taking the life of the footballer, but also took the opportunity to explain the reason for his actions.
What I did was what any man would do. Because that woman who was there was not only my wife. To me, she represented all the women of Brazil. For those watching this, she could be your daughter, your sister, your mother, or your wife. And at that moment, it was my wife Chris, the woman I've been married to for 20 years, the woman I dedicated my life to, who always loved and respected me. The media said a lot of things, but my wife never had anything to do with Daniel, let alone my daughter. Rumors are always there, but the truth will come out
to light. After the confession that was recorded, Edison continued his statement to the authorities and finally gave details of what really happened that night. And when everyone was going to sleep and he went to his marital room, he heard the desperate screams of his wife. She was calling for help, so he didn't hesitate for a second to find out what was happening. When he tried to enter the room, he noticed that the door was jammed. Then he gathered all his strength and knocked it down. Inside was his wife lying in bed, and Daniel looked at her wanting to talk about her. Edison, consumed by anger, evidently lunged at the footballer and began to hit him. The screams and noises coming from the room caught the attention of the other people still in the house, and suddenly the party had turned into a battlefield. In turn, the businessman asked for help from Eduardo da Silva and Gorkin, both 19 years old, and David William da Silva, 18, 3 young men who were watching the scene from the hallway leading to the bedroom to take Daniel to the trunk of his car. The four men drove to another property owned by the family. After removing the footballer from the car, they continued beating him inside with increasing violence. They made him suffer for several minutes, but not satisfied with that, Edison took the situation to the extreme. The man, controlled by fury, tortured Daniel's private parts so that he could understand what was happening to him for being a rapist and abuser. Then they put him back in the trunk, and while driving on the highway, Edison checked Daniel's cell phone. That's when he found the photographs that the football player had taken with his wife in their own bed. Overwhelmed by the anger he felt, he stopped the car, took Daniel out of the trunk again, but this time to finish him off for good. Edison had a knife with him, and with it he attacked him in the neck until he took his life. The next thing was to discard the body in the forest, hoping that no one would find it, and then each one returned to their home as if nothing had happened. On the other hand, the daughter backed up her father's statements and confirmed that Daniel had tried to abuse her mother. She also commented that the three young men who accompanied Edison in the savagery against the footballer had acted with more violence than her father. And finally, in response to some rumors that were beginning to emerge regarding a possible extramarital link between the woman and Daniel, the girl declared to the authorities that her parents had a healthy and respectful relationship. She assured that they were happy, and with this everything seemed to indicate that Edison had acted in defense of his wife. However, there were still more testimonies to gather and further investigation to confirm this theory. And what most people expected happened. It was proven that the family members' statements were pure lies.
My life was destroyed that day, too. My life ended that day. I was imprisoned and lost nearly everything. I lost my dignity, my honor. I was violated as a woman. My family was destroyed.
Other guests who were present at the after party that took place at the family's residence denied the version that the Brites had invented to cover themselves from police speculations. The attendees commented that at no time during the party had they heard screams coming from the lady, and that Daniel was certainly not on top of her in his underwear. In addition, when the authorities continued with the investigation to verify the family's statements, they proceeded with the search on the couple's phones, and what they found there left them perplexed. Edison and Christiana didn't have as good a relationship as they claimed to have. In fact, the messages they sent to each other completely debunked these claims. Indeed, the investigators read with their own eyes the aggressions they exchanged almost daily. In fact, on one occasion, the woman demanded her husband to come home immediately to explain why there was a photo of him with another woman in the background. The man, instead of calming the situation, told his wife that he hated her and wished she was open. The contempt they had for each other was so much that the woman was already communicating with specialist lawyers and arranging appointments to start divorce proceedings. And what the authorities were also able to find out was that the couple had been separated long before the birthday party was held, and they didn't even sleep in the same room, but they had made the decision to keep up appearances so that rumors wouldn't spread on their daughter's special day. Thus, when this information came to light, there were speculations about a clandestine romance between Daniel and Christiana. However, the theory was dismissed because no concrete evidence was found to support it. Another reason why the police concluded that the family had lied in their testimonies were the results of the tests that the woman was subjected to. According to experts, there was no evidence on her body that showed she had been forced into intimacy. And so each new discovery worsened the situation for the spouses or the suspects. And the statement of the other three involved who had helped the businessman to make him suffer and discard Daniel's body in the forest complicated it even more. And I tell you this because everyone confessed that they had done it because the man threatened them. But they assured that at no time did they get out of the car, implying that Edison had been the only material author of the suffering and of having taken Daniel's life. However, they failed to avoid arrest. So far, 6 people had been arrested for the crime against Daniel, but on November 16th, a 19-year-old named Eduardo Purcote was also taken to the police station. Apparently, Purcote had attended the party with his twin brother. He had played a significant role in committing the crime. The young man became implicated in the case because he was responsible for breaking Daniel's phone. That is, he had destroyed evidence. But he had also collaborated with Edison to break down the room door and even manipulated the knife with which the footballer was murdered. So, and finally, when the 6 people involved in the murder were under police custody and the authorities had managed to collect the evidence they needed, the investigation was closed and a conclusion was reached about what happened that October 27th.
And it is that towards the end of November of the year 2018, in a press conference, Joao Milton Sales, the prosecutor who carried forward the case, said the following.
There's no mystery. There was a party where there were young people and a couple of adults, parents who were celebrating their 18-year-old daughter's birthday. They let that situation get absolutely out of control.
They commented that the footballer and Christiana did not discuss what happened, have any intimate encounter that day. They even denied the possibility that there had been any kind of approach between them with an intention that was more than a friendship. Simply in the middle of a party where everyone had drunk too much, Daniel wanted to be funny with the friend he was texting and took those photos, taking advantage of the fact that the woman was sleeping and no one was watching them. Definitely, Daniel had made the mistake of joking with the wrong people. And finally, the prosecution was ready to bring the accused before justice. A trial with a popular tribunal was requested, but due to the health emergency of this disease that we experienced a few years ago from the virus, the process had to be postponed on several occasions until it began in the year 2022.
I didn't see him look me in the eyes. He was turning his face all the time. At times I would look at him to see his expressions, but he always had a superior look, like a man with a turned-up nose.
With indifference?
Yes, with indifference. It seemed like he was criticizing what the rest of us were talking about. He is a cold-blooded killer who evidently did not regret at any moment what he did. He is a person who was born with the DNA of a killer.
While he's in jail, he will continue to think that what he did was right.
In the round of arguments where the relatives, friends, and acquaintances of the football player confronted the 7 accused of the crime against Daniel, the evidence that the authorities had gathered to prove their guilt was presented. Edison and his wife insisted on the version they had given from the beginning and maintained that Daniel had met his end because he had sought it himself, that despite the existence of evidence to the contrary, they reaffirmed that this was what the football player deserved for having messed with this woman. The charges that were brought against Edison were triple aggravated omission for a trivial reason, which refers to the motive of the assault, which was for a trivial reason. Also, somewhat cruel and impossibility of defense of the victim, concealment of body, procedural fraud, and corruption of minors. However, none of this seemed to cause him any concern. On the contrary, he showed a despicable attitude all the time, and that of Claudio, his defense attorney, was even worse.
Truthfully, Claudio interrupted me several times. I found him extremely rude, very different from the stance of the lawyers of the other defendants. They treated us with a lot of respect. They referred to people's feelings. Claudio, on the other hand, when I said that my nephew had been tortured, he began to say in a sarcastic tone that I didn't understand the concept of torture, and that it was a legal term that I couldn't use.
In March of the year 2024, the defendants received their final sentences. Edison, the material author of the crime, was sentenced to 42 years and 5 months in prison. In addition, he was ordered to pay a pension as compensation to Daniel's daughter, as she is a minor. Christiana was sentenced to 18 months in prison for procedural fraud and corruption of minors. Her daughter, on the other hand, received a sentence of 6 years and 5 months for procedural fraud, corruption of minors, and coercion during the process for having forced several of her friends to change their version of events before the police authorities. Finally, the remaining 4 defendants, Eduardo da Silva, Igor King, David William da Silva, and Eduardo Purcote, were acquitted of all the charges against them. Finally, although the sentence received by the defendants was a cause for celebration among Daniel's family and friends, and also among the public who admired him and hoped that justice would be done for their idol, outrage resurfaced once again as Edison continued to be the talk of the town even from behind bars. The person responsible who had the obligation to pay a pension to Daniel's daughter did not fulfill his duty. For this reason, justice decided to freeze his assets in some way to compensate the girl. But there was also a controversy in relation to this decision because apparently the only possessions they could seize were the property where Brites had made the footballer suffer and the car where he had deprived him of his freedom and had taken his life. That is, his daughter would receive as compensation the places where her father had lost his life. On the other hand, a possible escape attempt by the criminal also emerged in the media. According to some sources, the businessman received daily in his cell papers that had written offers to help him escape from jail and promising that they would later rescue his wife and daughter. However, this speculation was denied by Brites himself. 6 years after his life was taken, it can be said that the case of Daniel Correa has caused a great shock in his native country, but also internationally. In his journey through the fields, he had managed to demonstrate the talent he had as a football player and had awakened the admiration of many fans around the world, of thousands of people who lost the opportunity to see him grow and stop being a promise to become a consecrated athlete. Remember that there is also the other secondary channel where you can find me with many more mysteries, and on Mondays on Pepe Mysterio's channel you can find the interviews.